Nigeria's National Petroleum Company, or NNPC, has apologized to citizens for importing adulterated premium motor spirit, popularly known as petrol. Group CEO Mele Kyari explains that quality inspectors failed to detect the high level of methanol in the product at the point of export in Belgium and at the point of arrival in Nigeria. Mr. Kyari did not give the date of import, but said that the NNPC found out about the situation late in January.
It is a very, very difficult period for us, and it's very important to update our customers and the members of the general public on the ongoing efforts by NNPC and other stakeholders, including you, to resolve the issues generated by the unfortunate supply and discharge of methanol-blended gasoline in some Nigerian depots. Precisely on the 20th of January, NNPC received a report from our quality inspector on the presence of emulsion particles in the PMS cargoes shipped to Nigeria from Antwerp, Belgium. NNPC investigations revealed the presence of methanol in 4 of the PMS cargoes imported by our DSTP suppliers, including MRS, Emadev High Energy, AY McKiffy, Britannia U Consortium, Oando, and also our own company, Dick Oil. Cargo quality certificates issued at Loadport, which is Antwerp, Belgium, by Amspec Belgium, indicates that the gasoline complied with Nigerian specifications. The NNPC quality inspectors, including GMO, SGS, JOCHEM, and G&G, all world-class surveyors and inspectors, conducted tests on this before discharge and also showed that the gasoline met Nigerian specifications. As a standard practice for all PMS imports to Nigeria, the cargoes were equally certified by inspection agents appointed by the midstream and downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority as products that met Nigerian specification. It is important to note that the usual quality inspection protocol employed in both load port in Belgium and our discharge ports in Nigeria do not include the test for percentage of methanol content, and therefore additive was not detected by our quality inspectors. In order to prevent the distribution of the petrol, we have ordered the quarantine of all unevacuated volumes and the holding back of all affected products in transit, both on trucks and in marine, and our partners are cooperating with us to achieve this. We'd like also to emphasize that all defaulting suppliers have been put on notice for remedial actions, and NNPC will work with the authority to take further necessary actions in line with subsisting regulations. May I also emphasize that this is a very unfortunate situation. We apologize to Nigerians for this situation. However, we assure Nigerians that we are currently sourcing additional cargoes to ensure product sufficiency, and we do not see any danger or any supply disruption in this situation. I'd like to thank you for your patience, and we remain committed to serving you. Thank you very much.
Well, this is a really important statement to make at this time, and I'm sure the apology is appreciated. But I do wonder what will happen beyond the apology for people who have suffered damages to their cars and their generators as well. Because, I mean, an apology does not pay for repairs, does it? I wonder if there's going to be any sort of recourse. And we had Mele Kyari there going into detail about what NNPC is trying to do to rectify this, disaster. But his statement only confirms the highly placed industry source that I quoted yesterday. He talked about the fact that this methanol was not detected. It was not detected because there was no specifications in Nigeria. And this is the loophole that these unscrupulous traders decided to use to exploit. In Europe, you can mix methanol 2 or 3%, like I was saying yesterday. And here we find that up to 20% was mixed. So this is an exploitation of Nigerians. NNPC mentioned the companies that were involved, the companies with which NNPC has DSDP contracts with, but did not mention the unscrupulous trading company. However, MRS in a statement did. They named that company because MRS, like NNPC, is now at pains to really stress the fact that they are not at fault here, that they're actually just an innocent party here. And obviously for fear of getting blacklisted, because if you're a member of the public who has gone to a petrol station, you trust people. When you park your car in a petrol station, you open your tank and you fill it up. We actually trust them to, really give us fuel that meets specifications. So this is such a disaster to all the companies involved, and everybody is now at pains to clear themselves and show, this is the MRS's statement, that they are not at fault in any way, and also they have taken remedial action, to quote the NNPC statement there. But it just goes to show that these loopholes should not exist, much less to be able to be exploited in this fashion to the detriment of the Nigerian public. We have been failed as the Nigerian public in this situation, which is exactly why NNPC is now offering us an apology. And what needs to happen is that the loophole needs to be closed. NNPC has issued new specifications, and at the bottom of it, we have that somewhere, don't we? At the last item in the long list of specifications, including appearance, sulfur content, and what have you, you have ethanol nil, which did not exist before. But the problem is that that was not enforced. Why was it not enforced? These are all questions that need to be answered, and hopefully it will be enforced going forward. Okay.
In the last 24, 48 hours, we have had reactions from all the major stakeholders with regard to the fuel scarcity that has suddenly shown up in Nigeria, and also this story about fuel not meeting standard specifications coming into Nigeria. Every country has its own specifications. But we've been told this time around, over 300 million liters, 317 million liters to be specific, got into the Nigerian market. Failure of the inspection, pre-shipment inspectors, and also the regulatory agencies in Nigeria. Now, the reactions have come from different directions. The NNPC. The NNPC GMD had a late-night briefing in Abuja yesterday, which was carried by the channels. And what were the points that he was making? He was saying that the protocols in Nigeria do not provide room for methanol inspection. And the protocol list is available. I'm sure when Reuters comes, we'll probably have it on the screen. In front of methanol, it says NEO. And so in Belgium, Antwerp, Belgium, that the GMD of the NNPC referred to, nobody checked for methanol. Then it got to Nigeria, according to him, nobody checked for ethanol. And so, methanol rather. And then, of course, he named, because throughout yesterday, we were saying, those who brought the fuel that does not meet specifications should be named. And he went ahead and named them. The EMADEB consortium, the EMADEB Britannica, it's a consortium, one group. O&O was also named. Dukoy was also named. Another company was also named. As those companies, MRS, which you mentioned earlier, was also named as those companies that brought in. Even the vessels were named. So I think to that extent, on the part of the NNPC has tried to show transparency, has tried to act in an accountable manner to say, look, this is the situation where we are. Now, NNPC says they are addressing the situation to bring in up to about 300 million liters to address the situation of the shortage very quickly, and to also make sure that Nigerians are not put through unnecessary hardship. The NNPC GMD also talked about remedial action on the part of the people who brought in the fuel. That's the position of the NNPC. And it's important, as I said, the NNPC is trying to be transparent and accountable, and is trying to honor. And I think that the credit for all of that should go to the president, who already ordered that a query should be issued to the head of the Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. He too has spoken. I'll get to him in a moment. Now, after that, the MRS, one of the companies that was, fingered as a company that brought in adulterated fuel That's what I've been reading in the papers. Now, the MRS put out a statement to say, yes, so we're cooperating with the NNPC to make sure that this situation is addressed. But they said clearly in their statement that it's NNPC that we should blame. Because Duke Oil, they fingered the Duke Oil. They said Duke Oil is a major trader that works for NNPC. And it was the cargo brought under Rena, I think it was called MV Rena, the vessel that Duke Oil used that brought in the contaminated fuel. Okay, MRS tried to exonerate itself, but at the same time it says, oh, this problem, we will cooperate with the NNPC. So there's already, subtextually, an attempt to trade blames, to say it's not our fault, it's NNPC that we should blame because NNPC claims a monopoly on the importation of petroleum products. But I think the basic response to that is, look, the problem has to be solved in terms of hardship. And that takes me to the position of the owners of petrol filling stations. There's a National Association of petrol filling stations owners, something like that. And then there's also MOMAN. Now, both MOMAN and the owners of petrol filling stations, they are protesting that their staff are at risk, that filling stations are being attacked. Their staff are being hijacked, abducted by aggrieved persons. And many of these filling stations, they say, customers are saying they will sue them because many people have had their cars damaged. They've had their petrol-powered generating sets also damaged. And the filling stations owners are saying that this is not the end of the matter. They will pass the cost. They too will sue the NNPC. That's what they are saying. Okay, one of the issues addressed, I think by MOMAN chairman, is that how soon can this matter be addressed? And I think he was saying, and the filling stations owners agreed also with him, in a sense, that look, this thing can take weeks. Because they claim that they will have to clean the tanks, they will have to get pumping machines, they will have to do whatever, a whole process, and that who is going to bear the cost. Okay, so apart from these other two groups, the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timmy Priscilla, after the council meeting at the villa yesterday, at the presidential villa, addressed the State House press call, and he promised that there will be investigations. So the investigations, well, we look forward to it. How did this happen? What kind of remedial actions should be taken on the part of government? MRS is saying that it is not true. MRS openly contradicted the GMD of NNPC to say that, look, methanol was illegal and had been so declared. And so how did it come in? So you have two sides to the story. But I think we can take solace in the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources saying that government will investigate this and get to the root of the matter and try to see, what remedies can be offered. I mentioned the head of Farouk Ahmed, the head of the middle stream and downstream regulatory authority. He too came out. He was the man that was given the query. So he suddenly came out of his cocoon and visited some petrol stations in Lagos yesterday. And one of the things he said is that some cargoes have already arrived, and those cargoes will be deployed, and that the so-called adulterated fuel had been quarantined. We've been using the phrase quarantine in relation to COVID-19. Now Nigeria is quarantining fuel, okay? But he says the lesson of it is that extra due diligence will need to be applied. And I think that on the, on all of this, the important thing is that the Nigerian government, the NNPC, the authority, even the MOMAN, IPMAN, and all the parties involved will have to learn the relevant lessons. Because when you bring in adulterated fuel, polluted fuel, then of course you cause so much hardship. The chaos of people fighting at filling stations and all of that. So that's what the situation is. I hope the appropriate lessons will be learned. I hope the issue of cost will be addressed. I hope remedial actions will be taken. And there are some people, some cynics, who will say, well, we face all of this. Why are we bringing finished product from Antwerp, Belgium?
Why indeed?
When we have 4 refineries that are not working, that are operating at a loss. Okay, that's the big question, in my view.
Yes, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Antwerp, ARA, as it's called in their industry. It's embarrassing. That's the bottom line. Well, let's take a listen to the CEO of Nigeria's Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, Farouk Ahmed.
Well, to be honest with you, it's something that was unexpected because we never had this kind of problem in this country. Maybe the latest one we had was 2008. But it wasn't methanol, actually. So this is the first time we have problem with methanol. And it's a component of gasoline that normally we do not put in the system. But again, that it doesn't mean to say it's not a component that is blended in the gasoline, but the maximum acceptable limit in Europe, for example, is about 2 to 3%. But this time around, it's much higher than that, 2 to 3%. So if it were within acceptable limit, I mean, nobody would have known anything is happening. But unfortunately, it was a bit more. And the surveyors who inspected on behalf of the NNPC at the import, on the import vessel offshore, did not detect this material, this component rather, until when you go into the system. So actually, I don't want to pass blames, but I also want to take responsibility because this is our work. I've just been 3 months on the job now. So it's part of all the learning curves, and we are learning, and we will take the learning forward and try to rectify all the shortfalls that we have. No, it's not fair on consumers, it's not fair on anybody, to be honest with you. I mean, this is, like I said, something that happened which is unfortunate, but we are going to put all the parameters, detection parameters in place. This afternoon, I had a long chat with the Director General of SON, Standard Organization of Nigeria, Mr. Farouk Salim, and we have agreed also to work together towards the implementing strict compliance of this sector. I don't want to get distracted. I want to focus on the problem, to solve the problem. And luckily, we have gone a long way in trying to resolve the issue because if you go around Lagos now and around Abuja, everywhere you see petroleum being sold. So actually, it's a very limited quantity that slipped into the system. So it's not really, not to give any excuses, but it's not really that much volume that went in the system. And that's why, you can go to any petrol station now. If you go around Lagos, you go to Abuja, you see serving. And this is all the on-spec material.
Well, so nobody wants to be a fall guy in this really embarrassing incident, yes. But I want to stress that there's a need to go beyond an apology and actually, offer some restitution to people whose property has been damaged as a result of this. It's no fault of their own.
Well, I hope, Farouk Ahmed will respond appropriately, accordingly, to the query that the President of Nigeria has directed should be issued to him. So visiting suddenly, going on a trip to Lagos to go and visit some filling stations is not enough. You should give a comprehensive report. The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timi Presiva, has already briefed the President. So he needs to say a lot more. One of the things he said, which was not covered by that video, but which is reported in some of the papers today, is that an effort is going to be made by the Nigerian government to reblend the off-spec, I think that should be the right word, off-spec fuel that was brought into the country. But the reblending, the interesting thing there is that it's very costly. Because if you say you discharge the off-spec fuel, you could create environmental problems. But what the papers reported is that for you to reblend 200,000 liters of fuel, you will need 800,000 liters of fuel to be able to reblend it and reduce the level of methanol. So the question that the marketers are asking, who will be at the cost? Even the authority, the upstream and midstream and downstream authority, is saying that it's a very costly exercise. So there are many questions involved, and I hope that the investigations suggested by the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources will be carried out expeditiously, and the various stakeholders involved will do the right thing in the interest of the Nigerian consumer. And I hope the Consumer Protection Council will also say something. I have not heard the voice of the Consumer Protection Council in this, because this is a consumer protection issue. We suffering people of Nigeria.
It's awful. Well, that's all on the news headlines. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Rota Sodiri, Adeswa Moran, and Erin Akedojola to give us updates on African business, COVID-19, and sporting activities across the globe. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rota Sodiri is here to give us an African business update. Morning, Rotas.
Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning to our viewers. We kick off with oil and gas, but you two have done absolute justice to the issues that have been raised. So, really not much more to add, except I will focus on MRS, though, and Doctor mentioned their press release. MRS is MRS Oil, a publicly traded company. They have to answer to shareholders. They have to answer to regulators. It's a good thing that they put out this press release, but it came about 24 hours before the NNPC put out their statement, which means it looked like they're trying to just quickly jump ahead of this issue. I noticed the fuel queues on Saturday last week when I was out, which means that the supply had to have been cut from Friday evening, or the word had been put out to reduce, the word had been put out about the contaminated supplies, which the public didn't know about. It is, as Doctor was talking about consumer protection and so on and so forth, for a publicly traded firm, when they release their earnings results, they put it out to on the NGX, the Nigerian Stock Exchange. They put it out to the public. Anything that can affect either your earnings, because I think MRS Post said that there were about 8 of its stations that received the oil, or rather received the contaminated fuel, which they say they flagged immediately and notified the NNPC. If you read the NNPC statement, they said it's our quality surveyors who noticed it first, and then we're fingering all these folks and so on and so forth. But just on the matter of transparency, for a publicly traded firm that answers to shareholders and then regulators, this should have come out way earlier. We should have put this out on Monday. If they had done that, and the press release from MRS is pretty detailed. They mentioned the traders who brought it in. They said that they flagged it. They mentioned they reached out to the regulators and so on and so forth. For the purpose of transparency and everything else, that should have come out a lot earlier. But it's still good that they put it out there. As a publicly traded firm, they had to do that. So these type of things, the amount of time it's taken to hear from government. Remember, it was Arise News investigations that first got the answers to this before anyone else, right? We put out feelers there to find out what was going on, and then the government caught up after that. So in terms of reducing the trust deficits, in terms of just transparency and getting the word out early, this I think is one of the main takeaways from this saga. And then Doctor, of course, has brought up the other ramifications with petrol stations being attacked and people wanting recourse for their damaged cars. If you go to a restaurant and you eat contaminated chicken and you get food poisoning and you go to the hospital, who are you going to hold responsible for food poisoning for the contaminated chicken? You're going to hold the restaurant responsible. Now, of course, that's probably a different analogy, because restaurants bring in their own chicken from overseas and we grow it locally, whereas you've got a regulator who is also a player in the sector and the sole importer. So it's all, finger pointing and so on and so forth. But the key thing here, for publicly traded companies that are involved here, get your word out early, let the public know what's going on, be as transparent as possible. That's what's going to reduce the trust deficits in the nation. But it's good to see the NNPC has apologized. Good to see MRS and everybody else has done that. Now it's a matter of moving forward and making sure this doesn't happen again. And it has happened before. We move to South Africa. South Africa's business confidence index is up to a 3-month high. This is as a result of COVID restrictions being eased. The Reserve Bank of South Africa, I think it's at 94.1 is where the business sentiment, business confidence index is. So basically businesses, I think South Africa is coming out of their fourth wave. Fourth wave, remember alcohol in particular, alcohol and alcohol sales were particularly impacted with the lockdowns and the movement restrictions. There were folks in the restaurant segment, hospitalities rather, who said that alcohol sales are up to about 40-50% of their revenue. So you can imagine what restrictions on alcohol sales meant for businesses there. But restrictions have been eased, and this latest confidence index at 94.1 shows that at least they're upbeat about where things are headed. Although I will say that the South African government is looking at placing job quotas, employment caps on foreign firms because of the whole unemployment situation. But that's a law that we'll see later on. To Tanzania. Tanzania, their debts last year rose about 20% to 36 or $37 billion. Tanzania is ramping up infrastructure spending. Transportation made up the largest amount of debt increase, so does telecommunications, and then social welfare, education, and energy. When I think of Tanzania, I think of Zanzibar. What do you think of when you think of Tanzania?
Tourism.
Tourism brought in $1.4 billion last year. It's a huge revenue generator for Tanzania. I'm hoping to go to Zanzibar one of these days. Haven't been there yet. Also, we saw gold exports drop about 7.2%, but they still brought in $2.7 billion. That's their biggest export. But pretty much for what Tanzania is trying to do, they are ramping infrastructure spending, rail, rail tourism. They want to bring in more foreigners into the country. They want to improve infrastructure, telecommunications, 5G. That's where they're pointing at. So that's as a result of the reason why we're seeing their debt rise. I believe they still plan on spending about. They want to increase spending even more on infrastructure, about 7.4% between fiscal year 2022 and 2023, while trying to keep their deficits down to about 3% of GDP. Finally, Zambia. Zambia says that by the fourth quarter of this year, they would have completed their research on CBDC, which is central bank digital currency. Of course, Nigeria led the way in this regard. Other nations are exploring it. But cryptocurrencies are not legal in Zambia. They've advised people not to trade in them, but to get ahead of everyone else, they're looking to explore and have their research completed by the fourth quarter to issue their own digital currency, which will help with financial inclusion, speeding up transactions, and the like.
But they're still very emphatic against cryptocurrency.
Very much so.
Most central banks are, including our central bank here in Nigeria. And talking about consumer protection, like we have been this morning, that's one of the real issues that, cryptocurrencies don't have any legal backing.
Correct.
And then the money laundering issues as well. So there's that. It's not about the technology. It's about the cryptocurrency.
The U.S. Justice Department, just yesterday or the day before, recovered $3.6 billion. That's more than tourism and gold exports for Tanzania. 3.6 billion in crypto that they recovered from a scam from 2016. So it's very scary.
The thing with crypto, but.
Please go.
Okay. To go to your point about the MRS statement, it's such an interesting point. So you're saying that the onus is on the individual company rather than waiting for the regulator.
Yeah, don't
That's
wait
a
for
really
the regulator.
interesting point. Well, what I appreciate about their statement is that they named the unscrupulous trader who tried to make a quick buck at our expense as the Nigerian public. It's completely wrong what they did, because obviously methanol is much cheaper, $400 per ton. So let's just bung 20% in there, mix it, and send that to Nigeria, and we don't care what happens. But yes, they do need to go. This is NNPC. It does need to go beyond the apology, which is appreciated, I'm sure. But there are real damages that have been accrued as a result of this issue. That's not the individual's fault. But MRS, another thing I liked about their statement, the last time with the caps lock, capital letters, that the petrol has been isolated, it's no longer being sold. Everybody's
that was the worst.
Scrambling to just really distance yourself from this mess.
When you are a publicly traded company and you answer to shareholders, you've got to move quickly and distance yourself. So that MRS had to move.
Which is why probably the most interesting line in the MRS press statement is the attempt to reassure their customers that look, they have on spec, petrol in their various stations, and that buyers should not panic. But in any case, you will find different dimensions to the story, as I said earlier when we took the story in the headline segment. But to go very quickly to Zambia. Zambia's central bank says it's still conducting research.
Yes.
It's not as if Zambia has taken a decision yet. Zambia is saying, oh, by the fourth quarter, they will now decide whether or not to introduce the central bank digital currency. But if you see the trend, what we have seen in China, where they're still experimenting in some parts of China, what we're seeing in Malaysia, Thailand, Nigeria, and Kenya.
Yes.
You know, the drift towards a central bank digital currency sits on two legs. One, recognition that the future of money is about digital assets. We're in the age of disruption. And, you know, it's not a trend that you can stop. So central banks are trying to see how they can play around this. Now, the difference between the central bank digital currency and the cryptocurrency is that the CBDC is tied to fiat currency. Okay, those who criticize it talk about, centralization. But the issue, of course, is that the cryptocurrencies that you have seen, they also have the challenge of very serious volatility. Yeah. So the plan in Zambia, I guess, as you have seen in Malaysia, Thailand, Nigeria, Kenya, is to make sure that government puts some control on it, even while ensuring inclusion, participation, and, embracing the future of, what's it called again? Blockchain?
Blockchain technology.
Blockchain
that's
technology.
Right. Yes.
Now, as for South Africa, well, South Africa Chamber of Commerce saying that in terms of its rating, it's gone from 92.1% to 94.2%. Well, good credit should be given to the South African authorities. South Africa has the highest rate of infection in Africa. They've introduced a lot of restrictions. You know, they were the first to discover Omicron and bring it to the attention of the world. They are part of the vaccine hub, suggested by the WHO. And they were even the first to move ahead with that vaccine hub. So we see leadership here. We see responsiveness here. So if South Africa is trying to ease restrictions, which is the same thing that has been done in Denmark, which is the same thing that Prime Minister Boris Johnson is saying that as soon as the House of Commons returns on February 24, he will present a living with COVID strategy, okay? Reducing the deadline for those restrictions by a month. March 24 was to be the deadline previously. So he wants to bring it forward. So you see some economists on the basis of how they have managed the COVID pandemic are saying, okay, let us ease restrictions. We are not doing badly. But they should all be reminded of the word of caution from WHO that, look, yes, you may want to open up after the fourth wave. You may say things have improved, but there are issues. But before we go, I wanted to ask you about the planned protests by this Telecom Senior Staff Association, the group called PECSAN. MTN says it is not aware of it, but the group says, look, they will shut down communication facilities, particularly with regard to MTN. What is the truth of the matter?
We still need some more information on what's been going on with that group. I believe that it has something to do with tariffs being increased to some effect. It's a similar situation we've seen in the aviation industry. There was a strike that was averted just about 2 or 3 days ago, where I think they were calling for more payments to be made to them. We had NATO, the head of the president of NATO, on Newsday just yesterday, there as well, saying that the tanker drivers there could halt services. So. Why, in transportation services, in aviation, in telcos, you've got all these, in a pre-election year, everyone coming out to suggest strikes. But I believe that that's going to be sorted out within the next day or two.
Yeah, because if they embark on that strike.
Telcos, that knocks everything.
We are going to bear the brunt. In fact, that would be worse than petrol scarcity.
Yeah, it could.
Because if your phone is not working, it's like you are dead.
Yeah,
we're so reliant. Nobody has a landline. Oh my goodness.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you.
I said Aaron.
Thank you.
Now for an update on the COVID-19 pandemic, Adeswa Omoran is here with us. Good morning, Adeswa.
Good morning, Tunun. Great to be here again. Good morning, Dr. Abati.
Good morning.
Yes, and you were speaking about the COVID-19 to Rochus a moment ago. Well, let's look at the breakdown of the figures as we have the latest weekly epidemiological reports by the WHO. Even though the Johns Hopkins University provides us with a global outlook of infections, recovery, deaths, and vaccination. Well, the WHO says that infections fell 17% in the last 7 days worldwide, including a 50% decline in the United States, while deaths globally declined by 7%. Now, 5 out of the 6 regions of the WHO actually saw those decline, except for the Eastern Mediterranean, including Afghanistan, Jordan, Iran, where we're seeing those cases coming up. And, you know, he puts it rightly, the DG of the WHO, he says, it depends on where you are in the world. It may look like the COVID-19 pandemic is over, but it's still not over. Meanwhile, the WHO incident manager yesterday said that 130 million infections and unfortunately 500 deaths had been recorded globally since Omicron was declared a variant of concern in late November. We're talking about a space of 2 months. We've lost 500,000 people and 130 million infections recorded. Well, the more transmissible Omicron has overtaken Delta as the world's dominant COVID-19 variant, though it appears to cause less severe illness. So people have to be warned that Omicron, yes, it may appear less severe, but it does cause much infections, and much infections will lead to deaths. Here in Nigeria, 37 new cases and no COVID death, thankfully, have been reported officially from 5 states, as well as the Federal Capital Territory in the past 24 hours. And here you have the latest vaccination data published by the agency in Nigeria, the NPHCDA. Well, it says 22.5 million COVID-19 doses have now been administered so far in the country. And the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change has been reviewing the impact of the Omicron-fueled wave of infections in 4 African countries, to include South Africa, Kenya, Tunisia, and our very own Nigeria. Well, the Institute said in its research paper that it identified a trend where it takes roughly a 6 months window for a new COVID-19 wave to be driven by a new variant to impact the continent. So the Tony Blair Institute says a 5th wave is definitely imminent on the continent of Africa, but it says that the damage caused to the economy and the people of Africa by previous variants and waves can be avoided if the world comes together and vaccinates Africa in the next 6 months, meaning we need to end vaccine inequity. And for the African countries, it's also recommending that a 2-track response on preparedness and prevention to include the rollout of boosters, increased testing, and genomic sequencing, because you have to know what you're dealing with. And to do that, you have to conduct sequencing to identify what you're dealing with. He also says African countries need to adapt to more tools, need to adopt more tools to this very rapidly changing virus other than the blanket lockdown we had seen in the past. It says this is the only way we can see reduced impact, even though Africa has been lucky with the Omicron variant, high infections but very low deaths. It says the 5th wave again is imminent. Meanwhile, the EU has signed a vaccine deal with Senegal to buy 300 million doses of vaccine. These doses will be produced by the country's Institut Pasteur outside of the capital, Dakar. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen signed the deal yesterday, and she announced that 125 million euros would be given to fund this project. Not just the vaccine, but vaccination. She says the European Union wants to move from the message of just vaccines, but getting them in their arms. And a lot of reasons, we'll talk about that if we have the time. Finally, the EU donation actually came yesterday. On the same day, the World Health Organization called for more funding. It's asking for $23 billion to end the emergency phase of this pandemic. It says some $16 billion of the funds will go to the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, otherwise known as the ACT tools. This will provide for tests, treatment, vaccines, personal protective equipment to developing countries. Then it says that another $6.8 billion is needed to cover the cost of the delivery of these items to the developing nations. UK Prime Minister, you have said, is looking to ease all COVID restrictions very soon. He says he will reveal his plans in what he calls living with the virus in 2 weeks. That's a month earlier than they should have been eased. Back to you guys.
The Boris Johnson story, I guess it's nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that he's been pictured near an open bottle of champagne in yet another revelation from the debacle that is Partygate. And now the police are going to interview him and around 50 others. They're sending them questionnaires, formal questionnaires, which are legally binding. I guess it's nothing to do with that. This sudden announcement that was expected a month down the line. This is just, for me, the endless politicization of the pandemic. And I just hope that it does not cost people their lives. I'm sure it's really worrying for vulnerable groups living in Britain, let me not say the UK, because the devolved nations might not toe the line. They are entirely entitled to do their own thing, as we've seen previously with Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland heading in a different direction from Boris Johnson at times. So just in England, vulnerable groups will really be worried about the fact that people who test positive for COVID-19 are no longer legally required to quarantine and stay at home. They can go around, they traipse all over the place shedding the virus. It's actually really, I'm wondering why now, other than this obvious, the Partygate. So I don't know how he's going to be able to get away with this kind of behavior. Just really manipulating or even ignoring the data, which shows that COVID cases are still rising. So we'll see what happens in terms of what exactly he can get away with. But I guess really he's just trying to save his job, clutching at straws now, just trying to please his base and keep his backbenchers on his side, but at the risk of alienating the public, perhaps. And then the Tony Blair Institute statement, the part for me that was most instructive was when they talked about the short-sighted nationalistic policies that have caused so much trouble. We've talked about that here on numerous occasions. And it's also important to note that 6-month window. So a clear pattern has been established with this pandemic. And I hope that that call is heeded, and also the call from the WHO.
Okay, let's start with the Tony Blair Institute report. For me, the key point that was made there was the need for the wealthy countries of the world to provide support, resources, to bring up the global south, that is negatively affected, that is at a disadvantage in terms of the fight against COVID-19. However, the report also noted, as you pointed out previously, that the Omicron variant in Africa has not resulted in hospitalizations and deaths at a very high rate. But at the same time, governments in Africa need to prioritize. They need to be adaptive. They have to deploy other tools. While we keep making the point that the rest of the world has a responsibility to protect the low and middle income countries. Now, interesting report, particularly about the point that every 6 months you have a new wave. So the question is Africa prepared for the next wave, the 5th wave that may emerge, and for a new variant that may come along with it? But I guess the point was made more by the EU that you referred to, that the problem is not even vaccination, that the problem is vaccine absorption. And the European Union, in making a commitment through Ursula von der Leyen to say that we will help African countries, and the Institut Pasteur that you referred to in Senegal to make vaccines available, do these African countries themselves have the capacity to deliver the vaccines to the people? countries like Djibouti, Somalia, Burkina Faso, Mali, they are at a great disadvantage. And many other African countries are so disadvantaged. But the key message in all of this is, let me go to the third level of it, is a statement that was made by the WHO seeking $23 billion to end COVID pandemic as a global emergency. There's something they call fair share. And WHO is saying some countries have not met their fair shares. Saudi Arabia has met its own fair share. Kuwait has met its own fair share. But many countries are not meeting up with their commitments. And WHO is saying that, look, if you don't move fast on the access to COVID therapy accelerator program, COVID tools, ACT accelerator program, under which they had a shortfall last year of about $14 billion, then of course the rest of the world will be vulnerable, even more vulnerable than we can ever imagine. And that at the moment, we've not been able to meet the 70% vaccination rate. 10% of low and middle income countries have been able to give their citizens just one dose. Whereas in the privileged countries, they've been able to achieve up to 64%. Out of 4.7 billion COVID vaccine doses that have been administered globally, poor countries have only received 22 million doses, which is 0.4% of the total outlay that had been deployed. And so WHO is saying this is a problem. This is a serious problem because you can't have, the bulk of the larger population achieving less than 10% and wealthy countries having up to 64%. The vulnerable people constitute a problem to everyone else. So I think this is consistent messaging on the part of the WHO. As for Boris Johnson and his politics, well, the Metropolitan Police is investigating him. He's one of those 50 people. And then secondly, this living with COVID strategy that he says he wants to unveil, he won't be able to do it until the House of Commons returns from recess. And a lot will also depend on whether or not he gets the approval of cabinet. But in the UK at the moment, the irony is that infection rates are going up. The living with COVID families people, they're saying that, look, in the last 24 hours on Tuesday, over 340 persons were infected, and that the figures are going up. And yet the Prime Minister is trying to play politics with COVID. Even the Office for National Statistics has indicated that this week alone, in the whole of the UK, except in Wales, the figures have been going up. So what data really is the Prime Minister quoting? Because he says this is driven by data. Is the decision driven by data or driven by politics or his own survival? Thank you, Adesua.